Welcome to Coffee with the Candidates. We have Jay Williams with us here today, and he is running for District 18, House of Representatives. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's our pleasure for hosting you.
Okay.
So if you just want to go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Jay Williams, as she said, and I'm running for the District 18 House of Representatives. I was born and raised in South Dakota. I went to college at the University of Wisconsin. I have a degree in political science from the University of Wisconsin. And I've been interested in politics pretty much all my life. After college, I went into the U.S. Navy. Actually, as part of college, I went into the U.S. Navy, and I was a Navy pilot, so I'm a veteran. And after the U.S. Navy, I went into the Peace Corps. So I'm not only a veteran of the U.S. Navy, I'm also a veteran of the Peace Corps. After that, I went back to college, and I got a master's degree in computer science. And I've worked in the computer area for pretty much all my career. In 1987, I moved back here from the Silicon Valley, where I was working, to start a company here in Yankton, and I've been running that company ever since. So I'm a long time, actually not a born and raised, but a long time resident of Yankton and a native South Dakotan.
So just out of curiosity, with your tech company, do you do business here in town, or you do business all around the country?
Well, I do some business here in town, but most of my business, probably 70% of it, is outside of. I did a lot of business with people in California and Reno. I did a lot of business there, and then I did a lot of international business as well. So mostly outside of the area.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So can you share what skills do you have that differentiates you from the other candidates?
Well, I think that there are not many of the candidates that are veterans, first of all. It's kind of an unusual thing. So I have experience in the military, and with that I have experience with things like classified information, which has been in the news recently. And so I have some idea of what that means and what the relevance of that is. So I have that kind of experience. Plus I have experience living and working in the third world, which is kind of unusual experience as well. So I have, a wide range of experience. And then of course I've been a businessman for 30 years, so I have that experience as well. So I have a really wide range of experience. Plus I have a lot of political experience. In addition to my degree in political science, I have been a long-time Democrat here in Yankton. I've run for office several times before. I was elected to this and served on the school board, and I ran against John Thune for the U.S. Senate in 2016. And I've been pretty concerned about what's been going on in our country. I mean, unless you've been living in a cave, you know that the 2020 election was easily won by the Democrat, but the Republican who was running against him declined to admit that he lost that election. In fact, to this day, he and his party have been saying that the election was rigged and he won the election actually. Well, there's a difference between governing and ruling. Ruling is what dictators do. Governing is what elected officials do. But in order for elections to work and for a democracy to work, the person who loses the election has to say, well, I lost that election, but I'll get you next time. My ideas are better and I'll work to get them. When somebody who clearly loses the election says, I didn't lose at all, it was rigged, that's a real problem. And it poses a threat to our entire democracy. So I'm running because right here in South Dakota, we have really not a democratic government. Our state legislature is composed of 94 Republicans and 11 Democrats. That's a 90% supermajority. Statewide, every statewide elective office is held by Republicans, from the governor, the Secretary of State, to the treasurer, to the Public Utilities Commission. All of them are Republicans. Now in our state, Republicans is the largest political party in terms of registered voters. They have about 48 or 49% of the registered voters. But that means they don't even have a majority of the registered voters. So here we have a government in South Dakota that is completely dominated by one party. And that's not right. And so I'm running to try to try to mitigate that, to try to make it so that the people's voice can be heard. And that Republican Party that controls our state, that Republican Party isn't, in my opinion, doing the will of the people. I'll give you two pretty good examples. One of them is Medicaid. Now, the Affordable Care Act in 2010 was passed. And as part of that, the Affordable Care Act tried to give health insurance to everybody in the country. Well, one of the ways they were going to do that is by expanding Medicaid. And Medicaid, as I suppose most of you know, is the low-income health insurance that provides health insurance to people who really can't afford it. Well, the Affordable Care Act expanded Medicaid to give it to not only people who are at the poverty line and below, but to 125% of the poverty line. 12 states decided not to accept that. One of those was South Dakota. Now, that means that in the last 12 years, there have been literally billions, that's with a B, billions of dollars of federal aid for low-income people in South Dakota that they haven't got. And that is not because the people of South Dakota don't want it. It's because our legislature is ideological, Republican, and they don't want to take anything that has to do with a program passed by Democrats. And that's not right for the people of South Dakota. Now, this may all be a moot point because the Medicaid expansion is on the ballot this fall. And it's quite possible that the people will vote. In fact, I think it's probable that the people will vote to do that. So the people are going to override the legislature. Now, that's not the only way it's worked. And 2 years ago in the election, the people passed recreational marijuana and medical marijuana. And they passed that by a pretty good margin. The medical marijuana was by like a 70% majority. The recreational marijuana was by more people than voted for the governor. So a clear majority of people wanted it. But the legislature stepped in and stopped it. And they've done that before with initiated measures. So our legislature doesn't do the will of the people. And yet they've got a 94 out of 94 Republicans and 11 Democrats in the legislature, and they're not doing the will of the people. And that's a real problem. So I'm running, as I said before, to try to mitigate that. So that's where I am, that's where I'm running, and I hope that people who watch this video will think long and hard before they vote for any Republicans. Because in South Dakota, Republicans are all there are. We need to hear another voice.
So what's our biggest challenge during the upcoming legislative session?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is what I just mentioned. It's the fact that our democracy is at risk. And as long as we don't have a democracy, we don't have a free country. So the biggest challenge that we face is try to have a voice of all the people being heard. As I'll come back to this saying that, we aren't a country that wants to be ruled by anybody. We want to be governed. Well, what does that mean? That means that we have to work together. We have to listen to the other side, to listen to both sides and come to a consensus on things and make those things happen. So our biggest challenge right now is democracy. As long as there are a majority of Republicans in the Republican Party who believe that we don't have free and fair elections, we have a real problem. And I think that's the challenge that we face, the challenge to our democracy, the biggest challenge by far.
So there is a child care crisis in South Dakota. What ideas would you support to create growth in that business sector?
Well, it's a real problem. Child care is a real problem. And the real problem is that, people who are running child care businesses, they can't charge enough to pay their employees to take care of the kids. And that's a real problem because if they charge too much, people can't afford to do it. So I think there's a role for government to step in here and provide some kind of assistance to these businesses that are providing child care. And I think we need to really look into that and really investigate that. Now, what you're probably going to hear from the Republicans who don't want to spend any kind of money on anything is that, that's socialism. Well, all government is socialism. I mean, that's what government is. Government is doing things for the society. It's socialist. That's government, by definition, is socialist. We have to be careful of when we put these labels out and we say, oh, you're a socialist or you're a fascist. Because when I start saying people are fascists, which we have a problem with fascism, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in Italy, they just elected a fascist prime minister. That's a real problem. You know, that was the power, the Axis power, the Italians. Mussolini ran Italy in World War II. That's who we fought World War II against, is against the fascists. So we have to be careful here. We have to do programs that'll help people out and not be tyrannical fascists. So I think government has a role to help in the child care, and the real issue is to provide the sort of assistance to allow our child care providers to pay the kind of wages they need to pay to get really quality people working in the child care industry.
So what are your priority areas within a budget for the state of South Dakota?
Well, I think that, I hate to keep coming back to this, but I will, that my priority is to see that our state government is more representative of the people. Now, as far as policies go with the state government, I think the number one priority has to be education. It's the biggest budget item we have, and it's the most important thing we have. I mean, after all, educating our children is really, really important to our future. And our education is at risk in several different ways, well, at least two. And one of them is, it looks like now the state government is trying to control the curriculum in a way that suits them. I've heard this, they say, oh, we don't want to teach things that make people uncomfortable. Well, of course, a lot of our history should make us uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't teach it. And to have our curriculum, our social studies and history curriculum, set up by an out-of-state, right-wing private school is a bad idea. But that's exactly what's going on right now. So we have that kind of priority, first of all, to make sure that our education is quality education that works for everyone, and secondly, to fund it. I mean, our teachers have been at the bottom of the pay scale compared to all the other states in the country since I can remember. And they still are. We did some things to boost their pay a few years ago, but now they're right back down at the bottom. And that's while we have big reserves. I mean, big reserves in our state government. And we're not using those reserves, and we're letting our teachers be nearly the lowest paid in the country. So I think we have to address education as our number one priority, and we have to address it in terms of funding and in terms of making sure that our curriculum is quality curriculum that will help our children be successful when they go out there into the world and into the workforce.
So how do you feel about funding the tech colleges compared to the regental institutions within the state?
Well, obviously we are a high-tech world. I mean, that's where we've come. I mean, just look at this interview right now. It's being done on an iPhone. We are high-tech, so that's where a lot of the jobs are. So it makes sense to fund the tech schools. But I think there's more than just tech. I mean, we need plumbers, we need electricians, we need all kinds of tradesmen. Plus we need teachers and doctors and lawyers and software engineers. Well, that's my business, but we need all of that. So I'm really in favor of funding post-high school education for at least 2 and probably 4 years. And I think that should be, I think at both ends of the education spectrum, we need to expand them. We need to go before kindergarten. We have to have preschool. We need to fund that, and we need to get our kids started really early. And then after high school, we need to make it so it's possible for everyone to get at least 2 years and probably 4 years of post-high school education, if they want it. I'm not saying it should be mandatory, like high school is, or our grade school is, but I think it should be available. And so I'm all for funding that. Recently the federal government has forgiven the student loans, and there was a big uproar about that. And people said, oh no, I had to pay for my school, so why shouldn't the people today? Well, for one thing, when I went to school, and I funded myself to school, it didn't cost nearly what it costs today. And secondly, so what? I mean, what, okay, because you didn't get it, somebody else shouldn't? That's mean and impoverished. And I don't think that's a good attitude. I think our attitude needs to be to help people out and not to be distressed if people get some kind of a benefit that helps them, because helping other people helps us. So I'm very pro education.
Do you have any suggestions regarding how to grow transparency in state government?
Well, transparency is a real issue in our state government. For example, 2-3 months ago, I'm not sure how long ago, our governor had some kind of major accident that caused her to have back surgery such that she can barely walk right now. What happened there? I don't know. I don't suspect you know. I haven't seen in the paper what happened. Meanwhile, she had surgery at some point. When did that happen? I don't know. Nobody told us. And at that point, I assume the lieutenant governor had to take over her duties while she was, out and underneath the knife. But I don't know if that happened. They don't tell us anything. This Republican legislature, this supermajority, as I've mentioned over and over, that Republican Party, they caucus in private, in secrecy. So our legislative actions are being discussed in secret. We don't know anything about it. The Democrats caucus in public, and they should caucus in public. So what are we going to do about that? Well, the first thing you need to do is vote in some Democrats so we get another voice. As long as we have a state government like we have now that's dominated by Republicans, there's no chance for transparency. So the ballot box is the main way we're going to change that around. And if you elect some Democrats, you'll see more transparency. But the way it is now, we have very little chance of increasing the transparency, and it's a real problem.
So let's talk a little bit about sports gaming. Would you support modification of the current legislation to allow utilization of online betting, such as that on your phone?
Well, the problem with gambling in general is, and in general, I'm not really for gambling, but I also recognize that gambling goes on. It's legal in our state, out in Deadwood. We have gambling. If you go into, the state has a lottery. So we already have gambling. So we now understand that gambling is a thing we have to deal with. Well, if we have to deal with it, then I think that we need to do is find ways to help fund the government with gambling. I'm not opposed to vice taxes. I think if we can get tax revenue off of gambling, and online gambling will be one way to do it, I think that would be something we need to look into. On the other hand, gambling is a problem for some people. Some people can't control themselves, and they gamble. They really get addicted to gambling, and that's a problem. And I think that anything we do to expand gambling needs to be able to look at ways to mitigate the damage that might be doing. So I think it's a two-edged sword, and of course we can get revenue off it to make sure that we can have both sides of that, both the help for people who have problems and also for expanding it to get some more revenue. So I'm not opposed to that. I would have to look into it and see what the specifics of it are, but it's not something I would oppose.
So at this time, there's approximately 700 jobs open in Yankton County and about 30,000 across the state. How aggressive should the state be in recruiting new Americans to South Dakota?
Well, it's interesting you say new Americans. By that, I think you must mean immigrants, people who are coming to this country. For instance, if you've been watching the news, you know that down the southern states, Texas and Florida, are busing and flying immigrants up to northern states. Right now they're only trying to send them to Democratic strongholds because they think, the Democrats won't take them and they won't do anything to help them. Well, that's surely wrong. It's not a Democratic or a Republican issue. It's a people issue. And when we have migrants come to our country seeking asylum, as I understand most of these are people that we need to nurture and to help. They're the kind of people that got up from their homes and traveled mostly on foot for literally hundreds, if not thousands of miles in really, really difficult situations to get here to the United States. And they did that because they see this as the land of opportunity, the land of plenty. And it is. And right here in South Dakota, as you mentioned, we have all these open jobs, and we have migrants coming here. And these are not illegal migrants, illegal immigrants. These are legal migrants who are in our country. And I think we should actively solicit getting these migrants coming to South Dakota to help us with this issue. The other thing we can do is just make our state a more interesting place for people to go. I think we should be trying to recruit high-tech workers from both coasts to move to South Dakota and take those big salaries that they can get working remotely and move to our state and increase our economy. By doing that, I think we can make our state a much better place than it is right now. Although it's a great place, and we should be able to lure people to come here. I mean, after all, we're wide open spaces. We have some of the most beautiful topology in the entire world. And we have low crime. We're a great state in general. So there's a lot of things we can do. And I think not only migrants, but also high-tech workers from both coasts.
So who within state government should be supervising a program like that to look at immigration? Because right now, Department of Labor doesn't have a heavy focus in that area, and it really just falls on nonprofits within the state.
And that's kind of how the migrants in general are being handled, is with nonprofits. There's not much assistance, including from the federal government, for it. So I think that our state, well, the Department of Labor is a good example. We could expand our Department of Labor to specifically look into relocating migrants to our state. But that's something we'd have to do with the approval of the state government, and that will never happen with the state government we have now. We have to move our state government into a more representative government if we want to get any of these things done.
So as you've mentioned, out of the 105 elected officials, 94 are Republicans. So if elected as a Democrat, how do you plan to work with your fellow elected officials and the lobbyists, all with strong opinions on both sides of the issue?
Well, I'm the kind of guy who does like to work with people. I'm a kind of gregarious. I like to talk to people. I like to listen to other ideas. I have strong ideas of my own, but I'm interested in other people's ideas, and all the ideas I have could be changed if I'm convinced they're changing. So the best way to work with other people is to communicate with them. Get together and talk with them. Lobbyists have a lot of influence in our government, and that's a problem. But it's also kind of a necessity, because how does an industry educate, inform legislators? I know quite a lot about the tech industry, but I don't know very much about being an electrician or the kind of issues that are facing plumbers, or the kind of issues that are facing police officers. So I need to talk to people, or will need to talk to people if I'm elected as a legislator, who know about these sort of things. And we need to be careful, though, that none of this is done in private. It's back to your transparency issue. As long as it's transparent, as long as we know who's talking and who they represent and what their issues are, I don't have a problem with that. It's when we go behind closed doors and we be secret and we, allow lobbyists to fund little extra things for legislators, and those little things are not known about. That's when we run into a problem. So I'm for transparency, big time, in this area, and also for having as much communication as we possibly can.
Which is a great segue into the next question of how will you communicate with your constituents to get their input on different initiatives?
Well, I'm a very open guy. I have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to. It's Jay the Happy Liberal. You can go and look, and I have videos there you can watch. And my email address will be available to all. And of course, attending meetings and public forums and doing interviews like this are ways to communicate. There's a lot of things we can do. And I think that as a legislator, you need to be open to the people, and so the people can get a hold of you. And email with the high tech we have today. There's lots of ways to stay in touch with people, and I'm pretty versed in that area, and I think I would do a good job of that.
So anyone who's been paying attention in South Dakota knows that we have a housing situation, and all communities, large and small, can use more housing. So what needs to be done for that $150 million that was allocated last year to South Dakota housing to be utilized by communities? Because it's kind of being held up by some rules right now.
Well, actually, and I went and looked at their website, and I see that the South Dakota Housing website, they have, applications right now for people to go and to get housing assistance. So they are doing things. And I think that what they really need to do is probably advertise that a little bit more so that people know this is a resource that they can get to. And I think that the Housing Authority has to do outreach as well. That means go and try to find people and help develop housing. I mean, we have a housing issue right here in Yankton. Although I know we are building new housing out at West City Limits Road. We're building new housing out there, housing down in the center of town. So there's new housing to be done, but I think that outreach is probably South Dakota Housing needs to do more so that people know about the programs they already have. Although they do have several programs. You can go online right now and look into that.
Yeah, right now they are administering, because the legislature last year allocated $200 million towards housing, and $50 million they were able to push out, and it's in the application process right now, to be used for sewer infrastructure and I think it was stormwater management, some other infrastructure issues, and a lot of communities were able to take advantage of it. This other $150 million that's sitting there, there's a lot of discussions happening of, will that go back to the legislature to make other rules for it? Will it go to GOED for them to allocate the program instead of South Dakota Housing? Because I will say that from our interactions as Yankton Thrive, South Dakota Housing has been doing a great job with the programs that they do have out there, and a lot of the builders are aware of the programs. There might be other constituents who might need to utilize some of the rental assistance programs and some of those programs that they might not be aware of that. But
right, so that's an outreach issue there.
Yes.
And I think that's a good thing. Sending the money back to the legislature, it would be a terrible idea in my opinion, because the legislature, because it is so dominated by Republicans, tend to take the money and put it in their reserves and not spend it. They don't want to spend money because they're very, very conservative. And most people are pretty conservative. I don't happen to be, but most people are pretty conservative. And I understand that. But this is money that's available to help people who need help. And so helping people is not a conservative thing. I mean, it is conservative to help people. I shouldn't say it's not a conservative thing. It's just a good thing. Not liberal, not conservative. It's the right thing. So I think we should you take that money and get that money out and help people, because that's what government's supposed to do. And the money's there to do it. Let's not just put it into a bank account somewhere. That doesn't help anybody.
So Yankton has opened its first medicinal dispensary within city limits. What are your thoughts on the recreational dispensaries? And I know you had touched a little bit on that earlier.
I did touch on it a little bit. And the issue is, it appears like the majority of people in South Dakota want marijuana to be legal, okay? It's like gambling. It's a vice, but people want it to be legal, so it needs to be legal. I mean, that's what we need to do. The problem we have with marijuana specifically is that we put people in jail for marijuana. And that's, what has that done for them? Has that made them better citizens by putting them in jail? I wouldn't think so. It's made them, convicted felons in some cases, and that kind of conviction goes with you your whole life. So we want to legalize marijuana. Great. Let's do that. I'm all for it. I think we should tax it and get more revenue off it to help people. And once again, if you're so into marijuana, that's all you have, you probably need a little bit of help with that. So, funding our mental health facilities to help with people who get into problems with drugs in general is not a bad idea. I think that, once again, the legalization of recreational marijuana, excuse me, is on the ballot this year. It's not clear that it will pass, but it passed before, so there's probably a decent chance it'll pass again. And we already have the medicinal marijuana, and we already have dispensaries for that. So I think that what we need to do is, regulate them. I'm all for that, but we need to make it available and then tax it and take that revenue and use it to help people. Not put it in the reserves, but to help people.
So is there anything that you want to share with the voters that was not a part of any of these previously asked questions?
I just want to go back to the voters and tell them again that in order to save our democracy, we need to elect Democrats in South Dakota. And that's true nationwide, but it's a real problem in our state when people deny our free and fair elections. When you lose an election, you need to say, yes, I lost, and I'll do better next time, but you have to admit you lost. You cannot just go about without any evidence and say, oh, yeah, I won. The big lie is being supported by a majority of Republicans. And Republicans need to solve that. I know right now that Senator Thune and Senator Rounds both said, yes, there's a problem with keeping classified material down in Mar-a-Lago. But they haven't actually come out and condemned the guy who did that. It's time for Republicans to stand up and cast off this terrible, terrible, disgraced, twice impeached former president who is ruining the Republican Party. So my thing is, think about it, voters. You need to vote for people to represent you, not just rubber stamp people with a party R or a D. Vote for diversity. Vote for Democrats. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and to talk with the people and to talk with you guys about this. And I look forward to seeing it online.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. And as a reminder, Jay Williams is running against Ryan Schwach, Mike Stevens, and Julie Auk. There are 2 positions for the House of Representatives here in South Dakota in District 18. And as a reminder, go out to vote. Absentee voting is already open. And Tuesday, November 8th, the second Tuesday in November, is when you can go cast your ballot in person.
And I'll make one more little correction there. I'm not running against Ryan Schwach. I'm running with Ryan Schwach. I'm running against Mike Stevens and Julie Auk.
All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And we wish you good luck in the election.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you.